We'd like to welcome everybody out to our city council meeting this evening. It's October 20th, 2020. This is the administrative session, just a little after 6 p.m. In attendance at our city hall is Gary Peterson, Annette Judd, and Jerry Chatterton. Excused is Andy Dawson, and then hopefully joining us soon will be Kent Henderson via technology. I am joining via technology tonight, not to see if it would work, but I was informed this afternoon that I was a close contact to a positive test today. So just as a precaution, I thought I would try out our technology. We might as well.
Thank
see if
you.
it's going to work. So I'm not too concerned with the contact. It was we were both masked up, but we were, probably close together for quite some time. But this is a precaution. I thought this would be good. Item number 1 is discussion regarding the setback requirements for the private driveways and alleys. And Boyd, do you want to take this one?
Okay, it looks like you can see the screen. Can you hear us at home, Mayor? Okay. So we had a discussion a while back about the setbacks in the R4 zone. This was kind of a result of the current project that's going on over by the golf course. This kind of spurred this discussion. And the city council requested that this be sent to the planning commission for their review and recommendation. And they've done that. They discussed it in depth and held a public hearing and made a recommendation. There were no comments given at the public hearing. And these changes that we'll recommend were approved unanimously by the planning commissioners. So currently, the code that was originally given and approved by the city council was a 20-foot setback to the front of houses in the R4 zone, while maintaining a 25-foot setback to the garage. And that was because of the that kind of emphasizes the desire to have a long driveway for parking. 25 feet was seen as the right amount for a parking space on a driveway. Now, this applies to public streets, private driveways, private lanes, and alleys. Originally, the Planning Commission suggested that private driveways, lanes, and alleys be exempt from these setbacks, but the city council decided otherwise and said, let's apply it to all of the streets equally. And then let's have a deeper discussion about these setbacks in the future, which is what we're doing now. So to be clear on private lanes, alleys, and public streets, here's an example. This is the, oops, back one. This is the Yellcrest Towns townhouse project. You can see throughout the center of the project, if my cursor would work, you can see this public road that circles the project. That is a standard 60-foot road with curb gutter and sidewalk on both sides and is considered a public road. Now on these units here in the middle, you can see they have the back access into the garages on the back of the units, but they also have the front of the building facing a public street. So this is considered an alley where it accesses the back of the unit. Then they have a separate type of road. Over here, this is just a short what we call a private lane that accesses the front of these units. The HOA maintains that road. Same with the alley. The alley is maintained by the HOA. But those are considered private. And in fact, we even label those on the street signs in that project with a blue street sign, so you know that they're private. So those are the different types of streets that we're talking about. Now, we felt, and on the current project that we've been discussing, there's various types of roads in this project also. The patio homes that are on the Schneider's property, those will all be public roads, as we've talked about, standard 60-foot road. But up here in the townhouse area, they have a combination of private lanes accessing some units. This is also a private lane. Then they also have a private road that's 50 feet wide that connects into the patio homes. And then they have a private lane that loops around this center portion. So they have several road types in there as well. So we felt like it was very important to have better definitions in our code for these different roads before we could say which setbacks apply on these various roads. We need to define what the roads are. So we're recommending 4 new definitions here: a definition for an alley, a definition for a private lane, a private road, and a public road. Now, these are all new definitions. What's shown in red is a recommended change from the Planning Commission. So first of all, an alley will be defined as a private roadway that provides access to the rear of residential or commercial buildings with a minimum of 20 feet of asphalt with curb gutter and sidewalk on each, or curb and gutter on each side. Now, alleys, it originally said alleys can be a through street or a dead end, but dead ends shall not provide access to more than 15 lots or units. The Planning Commission, after discussing that, felt like, no, even if it's a through street, it should only provide access to 15 units. So they deleted that portion. So now it says alley shall not provide access to more than 15 lots or units, period. Units or lots that have rear access from an alley shall also have frontage on a public road or private road, like we showed in the Yellowcrest project. Now, private lane will be defined very similarly to the alley, minimum of 20 feet of asphalt.
Boyd,
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry. While you're talking about alley, before we get all 3 in our head,
Sure.
can we look at Yellowcrest and even potentially the other development, even though I recognize the other proposed development that you used is already in the system and grandfathers, so we're not going to modify it, but we would be able to see what's being applied and how it might be different had these been applied. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for example, on the Yellowcrest one, there's an alley there in the middle, and there's 3, 4, and 4. So that's 8 and 11. There's 11 units. Are there 11 units? I'm counting garages on the alley. Can you tell? Or driveways, I mean, whatever that is.
Well, you have 11 on one side.
That's what I'm saying. And so is that,
22.
yeah, so based on the new ordinance, that wouldn't qualify.
Right.
Okay. And how wide is this alley at Yellowcrest? Do you have any idea? It looks bigger than 20 feet.
I believe it was around 24 feet, 24-ish.
Okay.
And
But these-
2850 is also an alley on that.
Yes, that's also an alley.
Sorry, where's 2850?
right at the end of it.
Oh, that's also an alley.
Yeah, that's an alley as well.
So that's a good question. If I've already got an alley in the middle and maybe it's at capacity, can you have an alley attached to it? Because now you're still even more than 15 if you follow that road either way before you get to the other road. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question that wasn't really discussed.
Do we want to define it based on number of units or length?
So I think number of units, and the reason, this is just me at this point, but the reason is because that determines car trips. So if we're gonna have a 20-foot road, we only want a little bit of traffic because it's not really even a road, right? It's an alley. So I think 15 is a good number. I like where we're at. I'm just pointing out the change that would be required. And what it would really amount to is this particular Yellcrest development probably would have had to modify so that 2850 and maybe even the alley itself would have had to have become a different type of road in order to provide appropriate access to those residences under the new ordinance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. One question that I have is, we've always kind of used this as kind of the standard of what we like, but we wouldn't have got this with this definition. So how would that play? I guess maybe just something to think about too. I don't know.
Well, I think we got lucky and that this development works, and we didn't know what we didn't know at the time of what challenges we could have if it were different. For example, if they made that alley 24 feet, that was a nice benefit that they provided that they maybe didn't have to provide, but it makes it so that it probably can have a little bit more traffic on it than what a 20-foot one would have. And we might be a little more comfortable with that. So that'll be an interesting discussion as we talk about a private lane. And I know I cut you off before you got there because it's the same width as an alley, just a different type of road. But anyway, we can get there. I thought I'd just look at that. Now the other development that's currently in the system that you showed, it's not yet built, would be significantly different with our new ordinance, right? In fact, most of those roads in there would become a normal public 60-foot road in the townhome area, right? I'm making an assumption.
If this code was in place?
Yes.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, because of the number of units, there's no way they could have that without having a normal 60-foot city street.
They would probably be allowed to have this private lane right here,
Sorry.
and also this private lane going to the back. Because there's less than 15 units on each individual private lane there. But this large lane around the center, I believe there are over 15 units there, and that would not be allowed if this new code was in place.
Okay.
So
I don't think, one of the other things that I like to kind of contemplate is whether we're being detrimental to development happening appropriately. It would mean fewer, it would mean less density, but I believe that in this particular case, they purchased it intending to have less density and ended up getting more than they thought. In other words, it would probably still pencil out just fine if those roads were normal. And as a city, we would prefer it. So I'm bringing that up, just making my own assumptions or whatever as we kind of apply it. That I like the alley description so far. Anyway, that's just me.
And the numbers can obviously be massaged. We can change that number 15, can change to whatever you'd like it to be, but
So
planning commission is recommending 15.
I'm not sure how it landed on 15, but it's an odd number, and sometimes you're doing units in doubles, which would mean even numbers.
Sure, we can change that.
I'd probably say 16, just so that you could have 8 units, 8 duplexes or 8 double town, but that might not be how they build, but it could be, so.
The number 15 came from the Sandy Point Townhouse project.
Oh,
They
okay,
have private lanes in there. The longest one that they have has 15 units on it.
okay.
That's where the number came from.
I'm good either way. It's just a thought. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt that long.
Okay, no problem. Happy to answer any questions. So moving on to the private lane, the only difference is that the private lane is at the front of the house, not at the rear. They would still be limited to 15 units on a private lane. The next type of road would be a private road. Those, we already have a standard for those. Those would be a 50-foot right-of-way, and they would have curb gutter and sidewalk on both sides. Now, right now, according to this definition, it says dead ends are allowed and must be provided with a dedicated turnaround at the end and shall be no longer than 600 feet in length. And there would be no limit on the number of units on a private road. Now, you may want to consider putting a limit on private roads as well. If you put a limit on the number of units, that would prevent too many private roads from being used, So that you may consider a limit on private roads as well. And then, of course, the last definition.
Can I ask just another question?
Sure.
On a private road, where's our definition of sidewalk on both sides? Can it be against the curb? Does it have to have a park strip?
There's a park strip. Yeah.
Okay, does this tie into something that tells us that?
Yes, we have public works standard drawings
Okay,
that have an engineered drawing of how the private road needs.
so that's in those standard drawings, okay.
So the final definition was the public road, which is our standard 60-foot road, which is common throughout the city. So those are the new definitions that we're proposing and have been recommended by the Planning Commission. Now, once those definitions are in place, these are the setbacks that we would recommend on the various road types. On an alley, we would recommend that the setback to the building be 10 feet and setback to the garage be 5 feet. On a private lane, it'd be 20 feet to the building, 20 feet to the garage. On a private road, 20 feet to the building, but 25 to the garage. And then same on the public road, 20 feet to the building and 25 to the garage. With that, that's all that we have to present on that. I'd be happy to answer any other questions. And of course, this is not up for vote tonight. This is just
Discussion.
Does anybody have any further questions or comments as you looked this over?
I have some more if nobody else does. Now that we've gone through all of that and kind of applied it to those developments, I'm trying to understand why there's not much difference between an alley and a private lane. I realize the private lane is out front and the alley is in between, but I want to just ask, I don't even know if I'm after a rhetorical question. Do we really want a 20-foot private lane available? I crossed mine out and put 24 feet with a question mark. Now I realize that a private lane also has curb gutter and sidewalk, right? So by its nature, the whole thing is bigger than an alley.
private lane only has curb and gutter, no sidewalk. And that's very similar.
Oh, I got you. It doesn't say sidewalk. You're correct.
You can see the Yellcrest example again. That private lane. It's 20, those are actually 20 feet wide with curb and gutter on both sides.
So,
Just access, it's just that short
yeah,
driveway basically to those homes.
so I guess I'm again asking questions. Do we really want a 20-foot road, no sidewalk, private lane? Why wouldn't there be a sidewalk? I realize I'm talking more right of way. In fact, or are we, or do we modify the setback? I'm not a fan of that either, though. But I would wonder if a private lane should really start to look more like a road, like the 50-foot road. It's just private, so they can have a choice of something, but maybe there's a little bit of a benefit, so somewhere in between there, and that's, I wrote down 24, it's only 4 feet bigger.
You know, I don't know. These work very well in practice. These have been in place for quite a while.
The 20
I'm
foot?
not opposed to changing it, but just
Sure.
just thinking about it right now, these
Well,
seem to work okay.
And I think we all need to go drive through Yellcrest and before we pass any of this and see those different roads and experience it. So I just pose the question as we determine what our streets are, because we're experiencing a situation where we'd like them to be very different than what's happening. And so if we're going to do this, let's really think about what would we like it to be? Not just what's adequate, what would we like it to be? If we're going to have more townhomes and more patio homes and so forth, what makes a good development? So that's private road. I would be in favor of that, of the asphalt being more than 20 feet. I like that it's also limited to 15 lots. The private road, I agree. Boyd, you made a comment about limiting that, and I think that it should be limited also, possibly the same as 15 units, to discourage its use too much as well. And then a public road with, obviously that's already defined and is great. I'd then move on to the setbacks. Can you tell us a little bit about the methodology of in an alley of going down to 5 feet from 10 feet? Keeping in mind, when we look at Yellcrest, the alley is now a very busy place because that's where the cars are all coming in and out of the alley. It's almost more of a public street than the street is because of that. And we're talking about allowing only a 5-foot setback on each side.
Yeah. In fact, our chairman from the planning commission might be able to comment on that too. I believe what the planning commission's feeling was looking at the Yellcrest project. These driveways here, these are less than 10 feet. They're between 7 and 8 feet. And the feeling was that it's really just a short approach into the garage, and that there wasn't much need for it to be very long, and they felt 5 feet would be adequate.
Does that sound right, Brian?
They can't use it as a parking spot anyway. So we're requiring them to have 5 additional feet of cement. It's just an approach. So.
Gives you enough room to be able to turn the car from this way to this way.
Right.
And that, I mean, I get it. In fact, you're probably right that if the driveway, if the setback was further, it would start to be treated like a driveway, and that's not allowed. Okay.
So if that's the case, then what does the setback become on the other side on the public street?
It would be whatever's required. in that
25?
zone. It's 20.
25 to the
front of the building.
front of the garage.
So
and
these
20 to
other,
the,
25 to the garage.
yeah, 20
But
to
in
the
this case,
unit.
on alleys, the only reason you have an alley is because your garage is going to be rear loaded, so
Yeah, you
front
really,
setback will always be 20.
really need to visit that area and look at that alley, as well as the other alley in that private lane down there. But they seem to make it work, and I go through there on a regular basis.
what's the other one? What's the other one called? Sorry, Mayor, go ahead.
Oh,
You got-
no, go ahead, Gary. Continue on.
What's the other development? The Sandy Point. So probably well for us to drive through this one and Sandy Point. Sandy Point doesn't have alleys, do they?
No, they have
They
the
have
private
private
lane.
lane.
So
Private
on the
lane?
private lane, they have the 15. Is
Yeah,
that
they-
only 20 feet?
It's 20
Is
feet
it?
wide, and the longest one has 15 units.
Okay, I'll make sure to drive through there. Lastly, for me, sorry, it was on the private lane. Because a private lane now is going to be an access road, right? It just happens to be private, like these other private lanes. Then if we're looking at a private road or public road at 25 feet, I'm not sure why the difference of 20 feet on a private lane. Anyway, I'm not even sure why we have a private lane. I wonder if we should just do an alley, a private road, and a public road, but I'm
You guys-
thinking out loud.
You guys feel like maybe, a suggestion that, the council, if you want to take some time and go look at Yale Crest and Sandy Point, that it'd be worthwhile to just put it on the agenda for one more go around, just to maybe further discussion and have it kind of visual in your mind. Does that sound like an okay idea?
It would be helpful for me,
Yeah,
whatever they think.
Let's do that then. If between now and our next regular meeting will be, what is it, the 16th or 18th of November,
A month?
17.
17th?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 17th of November. So that'll give us enough time, I think, council, to drive through a couple of those. That could maybe give a little bit more of a visual of what we're talking about here when we're looking at these Google Maps. So, and then we'll put it on another agenda for a discussion, just as a follow-up. Does that sound okay?
Yep,
Okay.
very good.
All right, thanks. That's good discussion. That's one that, is very important. So, item 2 is a discussion regarding the maximum height restrictions for accessory buildings. And Boyd, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Sorry, you're going to hear a lot from me tonight. Accessory buildings. We'd like to talk to you about a proposal on the height restrictions on these buildings. This has been reviewed by the Planning Commission with a positive recommendation. They also held a public hearing on this one, and again, there were no comments received at the public hearing. So we have a little bit of a conflict in the current code. It has three different restrictions on the height of accessory buildings. First of all, it says on small to medium-sized lots, the accessory buildings can be no taller than the house on the lot. That seems like a reasonable standard. On larger lots, it says there's a maximum of 30 feet in height. That's on lots that are 15,000 square feet or larger. But then in addition to both of those, it says, there's another section that says accessory buildings are limited to 1 story. And that's where it becomes a little bit tricky, because sometimes a 1-story building can be taller than a 2-story building, depending on how they're built. So there's a little bit of a conflict. So this 1-story definition is difficult. First of all, there's no clear definition. For example, there's a few different definitions that we rely on, but it doesn't specify this in our code. The building code does say that a mezzanine or a loft does not count as a second story. And that's pretty common. We have a lot of accessory buildings that come in that have a loft in them. We also have a lot of accessory buildings that have a bonus room or attic space up in the trusses. Now, that's very common to use the attic space. But we don't count that as a second story. Now also, it's really common to use that attic space, but also to put a short pony wall on top of the first floor to extend that attic space, make it a little bit higher. But we always have this dilemma: how high can that pony wall be before it's considered a second story? Is it, when it's 8 feet, it clearly counts as a second story, but is 7 feet a second story, or is that still just attic space? So that's challenging to define what a single story is versus a 2-story. And then, like I said before, it's very common that we get plans for a 1-story that are taller than what a 2-story building would be. Couple of examples. This is an accessory building that was recently approved. This is on the Jaeger property that we were talking about recently. This accessory building is only 1 story. It's open inside from all the way from the floor to up into the trusses. So this was approved. It's 30 feet tall, so they're maxing out the height. But it's only 1 story, so it was approved. This is another accessory building that was presented to us recently, and it was not approved. This is actually shorter than the one I just showed you. This one is 26 feet tall, but that space in red, it was considered a second story because there's actually a floor there, and that is a true second story. So he had to modify his plans. He's not building that second story in red, but he is building, he is allowed to build this portion of his accessory building that's still 26 feet tall. So with that in mind, the recommendation that we made to the Planning Commission is that we eliminate the restriction on the number of stories and simply have a regulation on the height of the building. That we, on small to medium-sized lots, the only restriction would be that the accessory building cannot be taller than the house. And then on larger lots, they could still go up to a maximum of 30 feet. And we would not worry, we wouldn't care about how many stories they have in it.
That's just a restriction regarding height, but there's still like 20% of the available land as far as square footage.
Yes, square footage is still restricted. That doesn't change, correct?
So I have a question, Boyd.
Sure.
So as far as our code goes, as far as having, like an accessory apartment or some of these things on a single family lot, any reservations by you guys to be able to allow and police not, having the ability now to have 2 stories on these? I'm just aware of one in Syracuse that the city had all kinds of problems with because they did have the 2-story and they did use it as an accessory apartment. They tried to kick them out, and it's just kind of been a battle. Is there any reservation that this is going to cause a problem with living space above garages?
Yes, very good question. The Planning Commission had the same concern. And in fact, they made this recommendation that if an accessory apartment is in one of these taller 2-story accessory buildings, that they'll have to have additional setback from the back property line. they would have to have 15 feet of setback rather than the standard 10 feet. They felt like they had the same concern that, you know, if you have an accessory apartment up on that second floor, they felt like they need more space from the neighbor. So
But along with that, Boyd, is there any, because you know, we have some restrictions on accessory apartments. But is there any reservation that this is going to open that up to maybe some more possible violations? Not that it's
Yes.
retroactive, but in the future that we're going to allow this to happen, and the city's not going to be able to police it as well, because once it's built, and they kind of do what they want to do at that point.
so you're suggesting like this may encourage more accessory apartments?
Well, no, I think it just allow, so right now, we've never been allowed to have the second story. By allowing the second story and having the accessory apartments, at that point, do you think it's going to be a problem for the city to police and manage that?
That's my concern.
Does
as
that make
well.
sense? It seems like I'm probably not being very clear, but
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if I completely understand, but accessory apartments would still have to come in and apply for a conditional use permit, and they're still restricted on who they can rent to. Does that answer your question at all?
yeah, I guess I still have the same, you know, reservation, and I realize the council needs time to discuss it and whatnot, but I think that, you know, over the years, there's a lot of people that come in and they say, yeah, we're gonna, you know, I'm just using this for boat storage or whatever, and next thing you know, they run their business out of it. We've known a few of those over the years, and they just kind of say what they need to say to get it passed, and then at that point, we lose, you know, even though they should come get a conditional use permit, they don't really have to. I mean, they would, but a lot of them don't. And I guess the control factor, we're adding an element where on the building side, we were able to control it. But I don't know, maybe there's a way that we could, if they do a second story, that the conditional use permit for whatever use they're going to do would have to go in conjunction with it. I don't know. I just think that never gets done.
Are you concerned that they're gonna get an accessory building approved that could be 2 stories, but it's not, and then after they get their inspection or whatever, then they go and add a second story and start using it that way?
No, what I'm
it's
worried
the
about. Go ahead, Gary.
It's the apartment that you're talking about, the living
Right.
space, right?
Living space.
That somebody may build a garage and do we have a restriction currently in the code that if someone has a accessory, what are we calling it here? An apartment, an accessory building used as an apartment. We at one point had a relative clause that it had to be someone related or anything. Is that still the case? And I think the concern there is that's nice when they're building the mother-in-law apartment, but mother-in-law only lives another 10 years and then it's just a free-for-all and they rent it for income.
Yeah.
And that's not fair now to the neighbors and anybody else that didn't sign up for that. That was going to be a mother-in-law apartment in a building in the backyard. I don't know the answer, but I think, is that part of what you're talking about, Mayor?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's just one more element that we lose control over because, you know, things change. I can tell you, you know, half a dozen mother-in-law or apartments that we've approved that after mother-in-law goes away, they're still being rented and it doesn't follow our code. We just lose control when that happens. But I'm not saying I'm not in favor of it. It just, I think it adds another level of enforcement and issues there that we currently don't have because it's being nipped at the bud because they can't build them.
I think there's an overall question here, and I know the Planning Commission dealt with it, and we need to kind of step back and maybe consume what they dealt with. Number one, do we want accessory apartments at all? And And if so, how do we want to run it? Is what we're doing adequate, or does it need to be expanded? This appears to be allowing it to be expanded because we don't care if it's a single level or a double level, so it's more enticing for someone to put a second level in a building. We're giving them more enticement to do it. Do we like that or not? That's number one with regards to apartments. Number two is if we've already built a home on this lot and someone wants an accessory building, do we ever want a second story in any accessory building? Or is it start to become unsightly to the neighborhood because it's naturally going to be tall when you put 2 stories on it? And I've seen some that are very tall and boxy, and you drive by them like, what were they thinking, or what were we thinking to even allow it? Now that, anyway, so I think there's 2 questions. Do we really want accessory apartments, and are we comfortable with where we're headed? And that's the mayor's concern, I think. And then do we want 2 stories at all in an accessory building?
Well, and part of that, maybe I didn't explain very well, but we have a lot of single one-story
That are very tall.
accessory buildings that are very tall.
I'm with you, and I haven't figured that one out yet, how to say, okay, well, if it's a single level, and by the way, in my head, 30 feet is really tall. If that's our,
Yeah, that's what's allowed right now.
right,
That's
so,
only on
Yeah.
the larger lots. You have to have at least a third of an acre.
but even on the smaller lots, today's homes are taller, even if nothing else, the pitch on many homes is steeper, and so it's raised the height of many homes. And if our size limit is the height of the home, is that still too tall? Because now there's some pretty tall homes. So
Yeah, I go, just for me, sorry, Gary, but
go ahead. I'm
the
done.
height of the building probably doesn't worry me as much as just the potential use for unregulated use that we may or may not be part of the approval on later down the road. Is that, I know I'm not, for whatever reason, I'm not making sense, but it's not the height of the building, it's just the actual, we're opening the door for something that we've never had before, and that is, a second story potential for these mother-in-law apartments and being able to regulate that as a city.
Yeah, I think I'm understanding a little better now, is what you're saying is it'd be much more likely that a second story would be used for an apartment rather than the first level.
Right.
We do have a lot, the only accessory apartments that we have right now are, of course, only one level because that's all that's allowed. And we do have a handful of those throughout the city of apartments in a one level accessory building. So it does happen now, but I understand what you're saying, that this probably makes it easier to have an accessory apartment.
Yeah.
Because you'll use the first level as a garage, storage, and have an apartment above it.
Then
So-
next thing you know, you have, that kid you can't get rid of that's living up there and.
Well, sorry, one of the concerns is that you build the garage with a second level that's got a bonus room and you're going to use it for storage, but then that kid grows up and does need a place like you're saying, and I don't know what this scenario, but then without consulting the city and the city's inspectors, they create it into an apartment, and now it doesn't meet code, and
Now,
so that's a normal compliance issue no matter what, but.
Yeah, it
there's
is.
another issue. We have had a few buildings built out there with a second story in them, but they skirt around the requirements by attaching it to the house with a small breezeway or something like that. So these still happen. Maybe not as easily as if we remove this requirement, but there are a handful of 2-story accessory apartments, but they're actually considered part of the house once they connect it, and then they're not limited to that 1 story. So, but that's pretty rare, but I just wanted you to know that that's out
Yeah.
there.
I know we have 2 other agenda items, only 13 minutes left. So do we want to the council, do you want to discuss this more at a later date? What would you like to do?
Yeah, more discussion.
Because I know we haven't heard from Jerry or Annette or, the other two that aren't with us tonight. So maybe we'll throw this one back on for another kind of follow-up discussion too. If you guys want to look it over, if you have any questions, contact Boyd and we can come. I think it's really close. The only thing is I just think it maybe opens the door for some future issues, because living in a bonus room is a lot different than living in a second story. That bonus room, that kid you want to get rid of, he's not going to live there during summer because he'd get burnt out of there. It's super hot in bonus rooms in the attic. So anyway, moving on to the next item is it's the discussion regarding the change to the land use table allowing the RV storage industrial zones. Kyle and Boyd, we have 2 agenda items left. Do we have enough time, or do you want to prioritize one over the other?
Let's go for
I
it.
have enough time.
I think we probably have enough time.
Okay, go ahead, Boyd, on that one then.
I think so.
Yeah, I'll try to go really fast. Okay, this was discussed a few meetings ago. It was Tim Gooch is trying to do a project, or is planning to do a storage unit project up on 1800 North. His property is zoned both commercial and industrial. This is his proposed project, 1800 North, his entrance road. This property at the front is being reserved for future retail commercial. And that's what's called out on the master plan. The back portion where he shows the storage units is the industrial property. So as part of his plan, he is planning to do an open RV storage in the back for boats, RVs, trailers, whatever you'd like to store back there. Tim had approached the mayor about doing a temporary RV storage here on the retail commercial property in the front. And the council was, of course, not in favor of a temporary use like that. However, we did not discuss his plans for the permanent storage. RV storage has always been seen by staff, at least, as a compatible use in the industrial zone. And we feel okay with that in that zone. However, we realize that it is not listed as a use in the land use table. So we are recommending that be added as a use. We would simply add it here to the end of the list, and it would not be allowed in any other zones other than the industrial zone, which is that last column on the right. And P would stand for permitted. So with that, and I should mention this was discussed by the Planning Commission and received a favorable recommendation. And they also held a public hearing on this item, and no comments were received. I'd be happy to answer your questions about it.
Questions for Boyd in regards to this one?
I just have one, Boyd, on the picture that you showed of the plot. Yeah. Is that entire lot 1 zoned that way?
Yes, that's all zoned industrial.
So even though the drawing has proposed RV storage area, technically he could use the entire lot if he graded it and did that. So is there a conditional use permit, even though, so we're making it allowable? Is there a conditional use permit for the use, or is it just automatic at that point?
He'd still have to go through the approval process, but it would be permitted with no conditional use. But you could make that change if you'd like to.
You just want to make sure it's adequate. For example, I'm assuming based on the color there that it would be gravel. He's not planning to asphalt that. those kind of things. And anyway, it would just be good to have a little process to see how it's going to be taken care of. But other than that, it's pretty simple. So I'm good.
And you will, his entire plan will have to
Come
to the
back.
city council for pad approval and
Okay.
we'll get all those.
No, I think it's appropriate.
Any other questions or comments on that one?
No, I agree with Gary, though.
Okay.
Are you comfortable if we set a public hearing for this one at the next meeting?
Where would the temporary storage be, in the back or the front?
Uh,
While he's doing the building,
The temporary storage will not be allowed,
will not be allowed.
but he was planning, he asked if he could do it up here on
Right,
on that front piece,
Right.
but
okay. But that's not what he wants to do anymore.
It's not what he's doing because we didn't allow it.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other comments? All right, we'll go to item number 4 then. This is discussion regarding the health insurance renewal rates for this coming year.
We recently met with Kai's Insurance, who is our insurance broker, and they prepared a summary of alternatives for our health insurance. Is presented on the screen to you here. We are currently with PEHP with the star option 4, and you can see the alternatives listed there at the top, and at the very bottom is the percentage increase from where we are currently this year. So sticking with what we have is a 5.4% increase in medical. Our dental came back with a 1.9% increase. They provided these other options so we could look at alternatives. You can see that most of those are significantly more costly. One being less costly, only a 4% increase, 4.2% increase. But as you can see, the deductible is almost double of what our current deductible is for individual and family. So we just, as we do every year, bring this to you. The budget is set in July for the fiscal year, and we have budgeted 12% has been what the council has chosen to budget for an increase to that. So we're significantly below budget. And we would recommend, I would recommend as the city manager to stick with the plan that we have with a 5.4% increase. And you can see the annual dollar amount increase is $217,000 to $228,000. So an $11,000, little over $11,000 increase annually to keep our current plan.
So just a question for you. Have we had any complaints or anything on the star option 4?
No, it's a high deductible plan. It's all out of pocket until you meet the deductible. But there has not been any concerns or questions. It's 100% covered after you meet that. That's the full out of pocket maximum. Everyone has just been very grateful for the plan that we have, and
Well, that
no complaints.
seems like if we've got a good product going and the increases are reasonable as expected, then we stick with what we've got.
Anybody have any other questions or comments on this?
This star option is not an HSA plan though, right? It doesn't
It
say
is an
that.
HSA plan.
It is an HSA. Awesome. That's even better.
Yeah, that doesn't show it there, but it is an HSA plan.
Okay.
Is everybody okay to move with to stay with the current plan of a 5.4% increase?
Yes.
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 Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, we have about 3 minutes before we need to start. I need to go grab a charging cable for my laptop. So about a 3-minute break, and then we'll try to start the meeting on time at 7 during this session of our meeting.